Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. And this is recorded, so folks will be able to listen a little bit after we do this. And my name is Lynn Hoyce. If anybody doesn't know, I'm a member of the Local Foods Program team. I work remotely, but am considered a campus person. So welcome. This is our, I believe, fourth peer-to-peer call. And we're really excited to be doing these. What we typically do is we do an evaluation after this, and then we get topics that you folks might be interested in. And I try and just go with whatever seems to be at the top, which has the most interest at that time. It's really helpful if you have someone that you would like to present on that topic, or if you would like to present on a topic. We called this peer-to-peer. And so far, it's like, it really is. It's not like Mary is above any of us or anything, or any of us, but we've only had one person who attends kind of do a presentation. So I've talked to Kayla, and she's willing to do like a beginning farmer presentation for us. So yay, that'll be really good. Arlene has done an evaluation presentation, which was very well received last year and very helpful. And I just want to encourage everybody else. We are all experts in some way. We all bring something to the table that could be valuable to share with each other. So, while you're thinking about what is it that you would like to learn more about it, why don't you also think about what could I share with other people that would be helpful, that I've done in my work, that I've found success in, because that would be really cool. Some of the big topics are often grant writing and fundraising. And thanks to Jan Libby, I decided we were going to do grant writing this fall with Reefus Wig, and we're going to add fundraising too. So thanks, Jan, for that.
Yay.
She's full of them, and I mean good ideas. So we're going to do that this September, but we've had, farm to school. We've had interest in that. I'm not sure, I can't think of the topics, but again, just anything you think of, if put it on the evaluation, and if you can present on it, or someone who could, please share that information. So today's topic is on grant writing, and Mary Swalla Holmes has done a lot of that, and she's done it successfully. So as you can imagine, in an hour, she's not going to be your magic wand, but she is going to, I believe, be able to give you a lot of great information. And even though I only know Mary a little bit, I know her daughter a little bit better, and they are an amazing family and a very giving family. And I'll bet you Mary would be available to you if you have questions afterwards. So we'll get her information and we'll pass that along. And if you have questions, please feel free to ask Mary afterwards. And I hope, Mary, I'm not speaking out of turn, but she's shaking her head yes, that she would be a resource for us. So I will go ahead and let Mary get started. Typically, she'll do a short presentation here, and she has taken some of the questions that you guys submitted, and she'll be responding primarily, to address those. And then there will be plenty of time for us to share. So I'm going to hush up now, and I'm going to let Mary take over. Welcome, Mary. Thank you so much for your kindness to visit with all of us.
Thanks, Lynn. It's great to be here with you guys. My name is Mary Swalla Holmes, and can you all hear me okay? Is the audio all right? Okay. I've got it turned up as high as I can, so I'll just keep trying to speak into the speaker here. I'm really happy to be here with you. I worked in local foods before we even knew what to call it. so I've been a big proponent of local foods and local marketing, and trying to understand how people can make a living from the land in rural or urban areas anywhere in the world. So I'm happy to be here with you guys here today. Now, is everybody here from Iowa? Is the group from Iowa? Okay, so I'll stay pretty focused on Iowa resources and Iowa things here. Like as Lynn said, I'm really lucky and blessed to have my daughter, Lynn Jenkins, work in the field as well. So she's been kind of keeping me up to date on what's happening in some of the local foods things. But honestly, I've been out of it for about 10 years. So you can, when we get to the question and answer period, then you can probably give me some some more about what's happening in local foods. But I'm going to talk to you a little bit just about today about the grant writing aspect of it. And I think, as they said, my grant writing experience goes everywhere from the smallest one-page grants on the local level to, unfortunately, a couple of big federal grants that were 3 or 4 years in the making. So lots of experience there that and on different levels. I am going to, I don't know, do you still see me? I'm going to look at my computer here because I have a kind of put together an outline for myself to kind of keep myself on track. I guess I want to start out with that. I believe at the beginning of a successful grant writing experience is really planning the project and working with the organization that is a high functioning organization. There's no amount of grant writing that can overcome a project that either doesn't fit or is not planned well. So I would always encourage you to spend a lot of the time on planning the project and making sure that your organization is functioning in order to make the project happen. I'm going to go back and forth here because I want to be able to see your faces. Here we go. Are all of you 501c3 organizations? No, I'm seeing some no's and maybes and who knows. So that's one of the really important things about for grant writing is to know what your legal status is. There are many different kinds of, there are different forms of legal status, and it's really important in grant writing. You're going to always have to know that. No matter who the grant is from, they're going to want to know what is your legal status. So make sure that you have that you know what that is before you get started, so you don't waste your time going down a road that ends in a dead end. There are some organizations, some granting organizations that are, just for 501c3s, but there are many more that are for other types of organizations. And you can get a fiscal sponsor. Have any of you worked with fiscal sponsors? If you have a fiscal sponsor, you just need to know that it takes more time to do the grant writing process because you'll have to keep the fiscal sponsor informed and in the loop, and sometimes that has to go through a board process, and so you might need to even include an extra month or 2 into your grant writing process to make sure that if you're going to have a fiscal sponsor, just to understand that and to know that. The grant writing toolbox, I saw that some of the questions were about the process of grant writing, and probably one of the best tools that I use is a grants notebook. And I'm literally talking about an actual notebook, a 3-ring binder. I get as big as I can, pretty much of a 3-ring binder, and then that notebook needs to have all the pertinent information that you're going to be asked repeatedly for granting agencies. So that includes the IRS letter, that if you are a nonprofit or if you, whatever your status is, your organizational status, you need a letter that shows what that status is. It usually comes from the IRS. You need your EIN number, your employee identification number, oftentimes a 990 tax form. That can be from the year previous to when you're applying for your grant. I like to keep a copy of the letterhead with the current officers for the organization in a grants notebook, along with the officers' names and their contact information, which is often asked for on a grant. Also, your organization's mission statement, a brief history of the organization, and your up-to-date accomplishments. What have you done before, and how can you show this granting organization that you're capable of accomplishing the project? You also would want any partner organization, or if you had a fiscal agent, you would want all that same information for them as well in this grants notebook. And state and federal grants oftentimes will require that you you'll need to know your Iowa congressional district, your Senate and House numbers, the number and the name of the representative for those. I have this all written down, so you don't have to write all this if you don't want to. I will. I'll share this with Lynn in written form, and you'll get this after the thing. So I should have said that before I got started here. I don't feel like you have to write down everything I'm saying because it's all written out here. So so now you have your grants. Say that you have your notebook all together, and that will save you tons of time when you do start writing your grants. The next is your grants calendar, and this is a tough one sometimes to keep up and current, but for me, it's been who writes grants for a number of different organizations. It's a really important one, and basically that calendar shows where the reoccurring deadlines are for the grants, when they're due, when the reports are due, quarterly reports or final reports. It's really important to keep those reporting deadlines if you're going to remain eligible for grants. So it's one thing to get the first grant from an organization. It's another thing if you want to maintain a relationship with that organization and get grants over time. You need to have timely reports and well done reports. And so so having the grants calendar in front of you will help you say, oh, look, this grant is coming up. What projects do we have? Or it might help you say, look, we've already got 4 things and we've got our hands full. We're going to let this one go by this time. But and again, I use a physical calendar. I'm sure maybe some of you will want to use a different kind of a calendar, an electronic calendar, anything that prompts you to say, oh, okay, this is, this RFP, this request for proposal is coming out, and what do we have to, what kind of project do we want to propose? And then that also helps you with which projects to put in to write to which organizations, which granting organization. For instance, if a grant is going to come out in the fall and what you're looking for is support for your farmers market, you'll want to do that either a year ahead of time, or you'll look to a different agency. You want the timing of your grants, when the money is allocated and when you have to use it. You want that to coincide with your project as well as possible. Otherwise, you're always kind of bending over backwards to try to make things fit. So the grants calendar can help you see, okay, this is a good fit for this project or for this idea. And so administration of this grant, I use grant tracking folders. Literally, I just write the name of the grant on the top of the folder, and then everything that pertains to that grant I put in it. Now, I also use a computer folder. I usually have a physical folder and a computer folder, and you put copies of your invoices, your checks, your emails, your photos, any evaluation results. Everything goes into those folders, and that really helps in the reporting periods to do the reporting. And I know that I'm kind of, maybe I'm getting the cart before the horse here a little bit, talking about reporting and administration of the grant, but to me that's really as important as writing the grant. In fact, after you, and maybe some of you have lots of experience with this, but after you've written a few grants, you start to realize that planning to write the grant, you need to really look at what the administration of the grant is going to require, and if you have the ability to do that. I think that one of the questions was, is it more worthwhile to go for a great big grant, spend a lot of resources and go for a big grant, or is it better to go for lots of small grants? And I would say, depending on the capacity of your organization, that, you know, if your organization has the capacity to deal with a lot of small grants, they give you a lot more flexibility. One big grant is sometimes feels like it's you're not doing as much grant writing, but you're certainly doing a lot of administration and reporting for those big grants. So let's see, I was gonna talk a little bit too about projects and programs. They should always, your project and program should always drive the grant process. And yet, as many of you know, if you've been working with grants at all, that it's somewhat of a circular process, that that you start with your project, you start writing your grant, you find out that they are really interested in the low-income population, and so your project may shift a little bit to you know, to meet that criteria, or to be able to find ways to reach that population. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I think that's sometimes a really helpful thing. That's what grants are meant for. They're meant to drive the projects in the direction that the granting agency wants them to go. Just don't turn yourself inside out trying to meet grant demands that that don't really fit your project, because in the end it just causes, it's very, again, we go back to that reporting. In the end, you're trying to make a report for something that really doesn't fit the criteria. And so again, I would, rather than try to turn a project inside out or on its ear to meet a grant criteria, I would look for another grant. I'd look for somebody who had a better fit than the one I was on. Let's see. And we talked about, one of the things people wanted to hear about was places to look for grants. And I recently, now in the last year or two, I've been working at a community level at the community. I live in Madrid, Iowa. And I have really found a lot of local grants that I didn't ever see when I worked at the university. So depending on the size of your program and what you want to fund, these local ones really, I think, can be very useful. Let me get back here. So have any of you written to community endowment grants here in Iowa? Have you had any success with that?
Yeah, we just recently did one with the Community Foundation of Fayette County, and just a $2,000 grant, but it helped us get some processing equipment that we wanted to do as part of another grant too. So Great, thank you. Yeah, and that's exactly the experience that I've been having, is that they're very short, very focused grants. You can get them from probably $2,000 to $6,000, and they can. The other thing that I think is really gratifying about them is that the community really gets to participate in your projects. I mean, it's a good way to say, look, we have local money and we're doing local projects. And I've had really good, I think almost every county has a county endowment program, and many communities do as well. There is a website. Let's see if I can figure out how to, let me see if I can do a screen share here. Just a second here, let me, the website is, I'll just say it, it's, the website is iowacommunityfoundations.org. And it's a pretty easy to negotiate site. It has all of the community foundations there, and their deadlines are often in the spring. In fact, April 30th, I know, is the one for Boone County. Or actually, Boone County's was maybe a couple of weeks ago. The Madrid Community Foundation is, the deadline is tomorrow, is the 30th. And so I would look at those. I would take a look at those and see what, see if they are appropriate to your, they're usually pretty wide open. They don't usually have a lot of strict criteria to them. So I would take a look at those. I'd also look at any city government grants, county supervisors. I know that some local foods projects have gotten traction with their county supervisors, and that's basically writing a paragraph or two about what you want to do, and then going before the board and talking to them. And county conservation councils and boards also have been giving some money to I know to some local projects. There are churches that provide grants. I sit on a board at my church that gives out from $500 to like $1,500 to local projects that benefit the local communities. And then of course there's all the private foundations. And I don't know if you're familiar with it, but there is a website also. And again, I'll send you all these, but it's the University of Iowa site that has all the private foundations listed there. I was going to try to get it up, but I don't think I will. So there are the state and federal grants, and are most of you funded by the state or federal grant? Is that are you funded directly through the USDA grants or not? Is that?
I think most people probably have some grant funding, and then like the local foods program team, Mary, we have some hard line funding through the university extension.
Okay.
So okay. we have some soft money and then
okay.
some hard money too. So, and I would think that's probably how it is. I know we've got like a Food Corps service member, so her funding comes directly from Food Corps, but it's a service organization underneath AmeriCorps, and as you know, with the current administration, they're trying to zero that out. So that would be 20% of their budget. We've got Sherry and Sarah and Kelly and Jen, Arlene and Jody. Jody, I think, has mostly hard funding, but a lot of extension folks on the line. Julie, are you also extension? No. Okay.
I'm just an advocate at the moment. So
okay, cool. All right. So there's probably, but I know for a lot of us that are an extension, Mary, even if we have some hard funding for salaries and things, most of our projects or a lot of our projects or pilots or work will have some soft money attached to that. So
okay. Yeah, that gives me a better idea of what.
And pipe up if I didn't cover somebody the right way.
Okay. Well, and why I was asking was the next part I was going to talk about was maybe some state and federal grants. But as you know, they change, and Lynn, you alluded to that somewhat, that with the change in administration and change at lots of things can affect those state and federal grants. And like I said, I've had experience working with a couple of really huge federal grants, 5-year federal grants. Not only are they exhaustive to write, but they require a really high level of evaluation and reporting. And oftentimes, a couple of trips to DC, and they really take things to another level. So if you're going to go after, especially federal grants, just you need to make sure that your organization, that it doesn't swamp your organization, that your organization's at a level that it can handle those kind of demanding timelines and demanding reporting requirements. And I would say too that that the internet is almost an endless source of grant possibilities, and so don't lose yourself in those exhaustive searches. Like Lynn said at the beginning, the magic bullet, I don't think there's really a magic bullet out there. I think it's better to spend your time developing your projects, talking to people about your projects, developing relationships and and putting out feelers for, you know, talking to people about, well, how did you fund that? Or if you see a successful project, you know, what did you do? You know, what did you do to keep the funding for that, or to get the funding going for that? It's always best, your best money always comes if you have a professional connection to the granting agency or the foundation. It's amazing all the little tiny personal foundations that there are in Iowa. And it just seems like the more you're out there, the more you're talking to people, the more somebody might say, oh, you should talk to, you know, Janetta Peterson. And then you go talk to them and you find out, oh, we have a little family foundation that we might do something with, you know, do some funding. And then always follow those up. If you get those kind of openings, don't be shy to follow them up and to say, I'll send you a written proposal, you know, in a week or two, or you know, let's have coffee next week and let's talk about that. I guess I used to be a lot more reticent about following up those leads, and now not so much. I follow them up, and oftentimes they turn into something. They turn into some funding. If a name and a contact is provided on a grant application, I always call that. I always talk to the person who is the grant administrator, and talk a little bit about the project, talk a little bit about, you know, who your organization is, and ask for advice. They oftentimes they'll give you great advice. And if they don't, then they'll just say, you know, just follow the instructions, and, you know, and that's fine too. But oftentimes they'll give you advice about, you know, maybe that this part of your project will be more interesting to the organization, or that this part of the, you know, program is the one to look for funding. Establishing that contact early can oftentimes, you know, save you a lot of time and energy at the end. How are we doing for time, Lynn? Are you? Oops.
Sorry, I keep muting myself.
Yeah,
we're at 3:30, and maybe, Mary, we could like take a break, not break, like leave. I mean, maybe we can ask people, to jump in with any questions.
Yeah, I think that's good. I'm not, my style is more interactive, and it's a little, I don't know that I want to keep going on to, the next thing I was going to talk about was more just how to, maybe the actual writing styles and things, but maybe it'd be good to have a break and have people talk.
Yeah, let's do that. So you guys just, you know, kind of police yourselves. We've got 13 people on now. If you can turn your cameras on, that's great. If you can't, that's fine. But just unmute yourself if you can. If you can't, send a chat, and you can just, if you can't talk, if for some reason your unmute doesn't work, then send a chat, and we'll go with that. So questions for Mary right now.
I think maybe one thing that would be helpful for me is clarifying the places where they're more likely to ask for certain amounts of match versus where you're not needing to match as much, and how some of the budgeting works. I know there's kind of an internal logic to a lot of the grants, but I'm not privy to it.
Sure. That's a good question. Great question. Budgets are really, really important. In fact, if I'm writing a grant, I start with the budget. I almost always say just what you said. Okay, how much do we think this is going to cost? Do we have enough match? Is there any way we can actually, you know, qualify for this? Most of the organizations that I know of want at least 25% match. There's very few out there that you can get into without, you know, with less than that, with less than a 25% match. And honestly, I like to see more than that. I've been a grant proposal reader as well for a number of organizations, and they always score better. The more match they have, the better they score. Well, I shouldn't say that. That's not always true. But it's a high criteria. It is a high criteria is the amount of match to have. and what you can match that with, that's an important piece too. If some of that 25% can be in kind, you know, through volunteer hours, you know, product, you know, giving product, you know, there are some creative ways. There are creative ways to get that to that 25% match or that 50% match. But I honestly, I don't know. The only ones that I think maybe don't require match would be oftentimes maybe a private foundation that was really vested in your that you had a very close that you were going to support their mission very closely. Then they might get away. You might get away without the 25% match, but that's a tough one.
I know it sounds really idealistic, but I was just talking with somebody yesterday about how the world of nonprofits doesn't feel that different than the world of business and business lending. Like, you have to have money to get money, and if you don't have money, you're SOL.
Yeah, no, it's very true. I would agree. And you know why that is, though, that they want to know that you have enough resources. And again, it is sort of that success breeds success as well, that they want to see that you've done a project before and that you've got the resources to do it. So again, start small, you know, start small, do it well, and then try to build up on that. Oftentimes those private, you know, I should say, oftentimes the match, and the match can come from private sources, you know, for public grants. What you can't do is, if you have a state grant, you can't match that with any other state funds at all. And university funds are state funds normally. So, so yeah, that budget piece is very, very important. And you know, talking somebody into the first $500 sometimes is the big key, because then you can start to leverage that, and that's you know, that gets the ball rolling. But getting that ball rolling sometimes is the tough one. And that's where you might be able to use some of those small community endowments, because they're small amounts. If you can match, you know, your $500 and you're matching that with, you know, say, you know, $100 or something. I mean, that can get the ball rolling, and then when you write the next grant, you can say, oh, you know, and we were given money by, you know, this organization and this organization, and you know, to build that trust and to build that, let them know that you can do it, that you can finish a project, you know, that you can be successful with a project. You know, and that's the thing too, that if they put their name on your project, then they want to know it's going to be successful and it's going to make them look good as well as you. So, any other questions? Do you want me to go ahead and go back, Lynn, to talk a little bit about the writing itself?
Yeah, and you guys, at any time, if anything strikes you, even if it's like, oh, shoot, wait, I just remember, just stop, Mary. Because again, this is supposed to be a dialogue, so it's not going to bother her. And yeah, so take notes, but ask her questions, and then, yeah, but she'll just kind of move on. So yeah, go ahead, Mary, and take steps.
Okay.
And we'll go from there.
Okay, I'll go right ahead here. So in the actual writing of a grant, the first thing you do is read the entire application all the way through. Now, that might sound like a no-brainer to some people, but I've seen way too many times when somebody they start at the beginning, and halfway through you find out that, oh, there is that budget, there is a request for information that you don't have, or you do have that, or they want 50% of a budget match and you only have 25%. So read it all the way through and think it through before you ever start, filling in the spaces and starting to write it. Again, and I'll say what I just did again, that lots of times I'll start with the budget for the project. I have reviewed grants for a lot of grantors, and I know that the budget is where most mistakes are made. And in fact, a lot of readers of grants will go right to the budget, and if they see a mistake there, or if they see that they don't feel like the budget and the budget justification matches, then they won't read anymore. They won't read any of your good words or your narrative at all. Like I said, most grants won the 25% match, and you have to match it with the right kind of funds. That state and federal grants cannot be matched with additional state and federal funds, so those are tricky. Does somebody have a question there? Okay. So again, and the in-kind rates, a lot of them, seeing in-kind also is really is good in a budget, but know that in-kind rates for volunteer work is often at minimum wages. I've reviewed grants before where they had a doctor, who was going to come and help clean up the garden, and so they took his in-kind rate at $75 an hour or something like that, and that doesn't fly. The volunteer work is almost always at the established minimum wage. So and I know there and you have to document those hours as well. Don't pad the budget. That's one of the things that is really easy to see. It's really easy to, I know people used to do it all the time. People would always say, well, we're going to put in a 25% contingency plan, budget, or they do that. But it's really easy to see for a grant reviewer. They almost always, grant reviewers are well versed in the costs of the field, and they can see very easily if there's padding in the budget. And if there is a written bid required, which oftentimes there is anymore, they want to see a bid from a just to make sure that that you can get the service or the product for what you say. Always use a reputable contractor, company, or agency, somebody whose name is known in the area or in the field. And then the timeline. The timelines are really important too. I think that's an area sometimes that doesn't get very much thought, or maybe it doesn't get as much thought as the budget. But make sure that you check the dates that the grant awards are going to be made, and when the projects can begin and when they have to end. And then make sure that you keep your project timeline within those dates. Way too often the project either gets started ahead of time or it's too compressed and there's no way it can be finished when it needs to be. Sometimes you can get a 6-month extension, but even those are, it's better just to get it finished and be done when the grant is over. If you can't fit it all into the timeline that's required by the grant, then you can make it into phases. I used to do the phases all the time: phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Especially if you have a granting agency that you're going to go back to a couple of times, just break your project up into phases and then fund each phase as you go. It's also a way sometimes to do a bigger project with smaller amounts of money at a time. So when I'm writing the narrative, then I think some things to keep in mind are that you want it to be very simple and clear. Don't use big words. Don't worry about saying the same thing over and over. Answer every question exactly what it asks, and use the same language over and over. Sometimes as a grant reader, you only read selected sections of the grant. So even though you maybe have said it 4 times, the person who's going to read that is only going to read it in one place. And so you want it to be the same. You want it to answer the question, but clearly and simply, not overwritten and not overdone. And always stay in person. I prefer third person for grant writing, but whatever you do, stay in that person. Don't change from first and second person or third person. I mean, keep your style, keep your person through the whole thing. And then I always want to use positive action oriented language. I always say the project will, not the project intends to or the project was designed to. I always say the project will, provide fresh food for X amount of people or something like that. You want to keep it, again, just keep it very active and very positive. Train yourself to look for that doubt and insecurity that comes into a narrative. Way too many times I've been reading a grant for somebody else, and you start to see where the weak spots are because they start to use different wording. They start to use more, they're hedging their bet sort of thing. Don't just read through it, keep read through your grant at least 3 or 4 times and listen for that. Listen for doubt and insecurity and then take it out. Put in strong positive words. And then check the entire proposal for internal consistency. This is one of the really big ones. If you're proposing to develop a countywide directory, say of local food vendors, then make sure that every element in your proposal is countywide. So if you're going to do marketing, it's countywide. If you're going to distribute, it's countywide, and all the evaluation needs to be countywide. A good idea is to have an outside person, read through your proposal before you send it in, so that to see if it makes sense to them, and to see if you have indeed kept it consistent throughout the whole narrative. And I know there were some questions about evaluation. I am not an evaluation expert. I oftentimes would say depending on how big the grant is, if it's beyond just, I would say, even a community level, I would find a partner that has somebody who has some evaluation experience. The toughest and the most useful evaluations, I think, are through surveys, questionnaires, and focus groups. But you need some, and I think it'd be good. It's good to have somebody who has experience in that. You might even want to write that into the contract or into the proposal. Is having an evaluator. Photos are really important. I'm a photographer, and so I find that part really easy. But if you're not a photographer, get somebody in your community. Get your local newspaper person. Almost every community has somebody who does photos, and taking photos of an event or photos as evaluation. Lately that seems to be mostly what I do for evaluation, is take photos and but then I've been doing a lot of building projects. So and then I would just say, don't be discouraged if you're not funded the first time. Oftentimes a granting agency wants to see that you are going to be around, that you're going to be that you're serious. And so sometimes I've applied 3 times to the same agency, and on the 3rd time I've gotten funding. So don't be discouraged. Don't feel like it's impossible. Just keep going back sometimes, and then you might get funded. If you're not funded, ask for feedback from the granting agency. Their goal, is to give their money away, and so there's some reason why yours somehow didn't fit their criteria. And so ask them for constructive criticism, and lots of times they'll give that to you. Lots of times they'll give you the comments that the readers made, or you know, you can ask, just come right out and ask them what happened, you know, what could have been better, and then next time you can incorporate that into your proposal. And then know when not to submit. I would say never write a grant as an act of desperation. It's pretty clear when an organization is, you know, is desperate for money, and you never want to sound like that to the granting agency. A grantor they want to be associated with successful projects and programs and a successful organization. And so if you find that any part of the project doesn't fit, or if the proposal is not, doesn't seem to fit the granting organization, then, you know, either rethink the project or don't submit the grant. It'll save you a lot of time and energy, and you want to have, you know, you want it to be a positive experience. And if you go into it with some of those negatives, then it won't be difficult. So,
Mary, Arlene, I don't know if I just wanted to draw your attention to the chat. Arlene, who is an evaluator, said that she typically asks, if people ask for her help, she asks for 5 to 10% of the budget.
Okay, great. That's good to know. I know that for a while, a lot of the state grants required an outside evaluator, that, you know, that they wanted somebody to, you know, somebody that's a professional to be an evaluator. And that's a really good way to, you know, to show that you're professional as well, to show that the project is, you know, is professional. But if you use an outside evaluator, but then, like you say, you need to budget that too. Your budget needs to show that.
Mary, I had a couple of questions. The first being, you mentioned, like, you know, if you had the doctor cleaning up your playground area and raking leaves or something, you can't charge a doctor's hourly rate. But if you were running a free clinic and you had doctors volunteering to come in, could you count that match as a higher amount?
So, yeah, sometimes they do make that allocate. They do say that if it's a professional service that's being rendered, then yes, then sometimes you can use a pay scale that would show the professional service. And that would be something you'd want to go to the agency or go to the granting organization and ask them right away. Because yes, that's true. If you're, and that would be, you know, I guess an evaluator would be the same sort of thing. I mean, if you had a professional evaluator who was going to donate some of that, then you'd be able to negotiate what that rate would be. Yeah.
My other question was just, can you talk a little bit more about, like, sort of breaking up the timeline and putting it into phases, and kind of the importance of the timeline too?
Yeah. So, as you know, I mean, oftentimes with a project, you've got a planning period, you've got and then after the planning period, you might be going to do some marketing and, you know, some press pieces or some kind of marketing stuff. And then at the end, you have the actual maybe event or, you know, or the big part of the project. So I would just say that you would look at those. I mean, you'd look at the whole project, and like I say, especially for some of the smaller grants, you could break that into, you know, phase 1 is our planning phase, and we need $750 to do that, you know, and phase 2 is, but that will inform our phase 2, but we intend to do this, but you know, you're not really ready yet to write the proposal for phase 2 because you don't know what the planning period is going to put forth, but you want to show that you've got a, say, a 3 or 4 year you know, it's a 3 or 4 year project possibly. I don't know. It's a little bit intuitive, and sometimes it really depends on what kind of money there is. You know, how much. You know, sometimes I've written for phase 1 and phase 2 together, and then wait on phase 3s. You know, just depends on what the money looks like and what the budget. You know, if the budget fits the grant possibilities. what kind of projects are you guys trying to fund? I guess I wasn't really even sure, not really sure what kind of projects you might be trying to fund. Or is it ongoing work?
At least for my case, a little of all those things. I mean, I think that there are specific projects that we take on to see if they're going to work and become ongoing projects. Mm-hmm. And we're always trying to write a grant to start a new project and see if we then are going to work it into our plan of work all the time. So, for example, one of the most recent grants that I helped write here was to work with the local food hub and early child care centers to try to test some fresh fruit and vegetables that would just be lightly processed and ready for the kids to use.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So did you call that like a pilot project? I mean, yeah. And so sometimes it would be, you would look at funding just that pilot to let them know that that it may be ongoing or it may not, but that's, I think that's really legitimate to have a pilot project or a planning period or a testing period sort of thing. But
Mary, that's another thing that on the local foods program team, a lot of what you said too, Craig also, I mean, we are always looking for money often to help partners with, so that we can partner with folks. But we also try to, we'll do a lot of piloting because quite frankly, our job is not to take anything away from any nonprofits or private citizens. So if it's something that we can do first to kind of work through big challenges or pitfalls or things like that, so we can take a chance at those things where we've got some support structures or infrastructure, and then learn how to make it more successful, and then pass along the information through a publication or share the pilot through a replicable means. Once we've learned, these are the really important components, don't do this, or this takes a couple of years, we thought it would take 6 months. But typically we don't look at grants to decide what we want to do. Craig encourages us to kind of dream in our own areas of influence, the work that I love farm to school, and I get to do more with farm to school. So it's kind of like, well then, okay, what do you want to do with farm to school? Well, I want to do a statewide conference next year. Okay, that's what I'm going to start looking for funding, because I don't, even if you get small registration, that's all I want it to be. I don't want it to be cost prohibitive. And there's a lot of Food Corps and AmeriCorps and just folks who don't have any funding. If we could give them a scholarship to for their registration, they could get there. Or we could, if we could pay for their hotel or something. So we kind of determine a project, and then we start looking for grants so that we're not having mission creep. That's another thing Craig is huge on. Don't say yes to something just for the money. We have to say yes because it's part of our mission. So those are some of the ways that we look for and deal with grants.
Yeah, I would say, I know one of the questions was where to look for ongoing, staffing and everyday operations, and that's always the hardest money to find. The hardest money to find is somebody who is willing to just support operations. I'm sorry to say that, but it's always, I mean, I've not found any magic key there. Now, having said that, I would say that some of the organizations, like perhaps a county board of supervisors, if they felt like your mission was really in sync with theirs, or if you knew them well, or if you had some in with them or whatever, they're the kind of organization that could give $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 toward operating costs. I mean, because they don't really have strict guidelines as to how they have to spend their money. So
Mary, this is Jan on the phone, and I am aware that some folks have been pretty creative about thinking where they can plug into grants things like communications and some other components that are some of those operating and personnel pieces. And if they get plugged in enough grants, you start to build up a little bit more capacity to focus on those kinds of skills. Can you, within your operation, can you speak to that at all?
I'm not sure. I mean, if you can find that, if you can find that angle, I guess, then I think it's worth pursuing. I wonder about, and I haven't, like I said, I've been working more in community work now than local foods work, but I have been finding that the energy companies have community grants that are available, and they seem to be open almost to those operational kind of things, but I haven't really gotten into them yet. Are those the kind of ones you're talking about, Jan, or what?
No, and I don't have enough experience with the energy companies, but I know I've had some conversation with Sally at PFI a little bit about how they manage to keep their, ever expanding staff supported.
Yeah.
And that was, they've got somebody who's doing full-time communications. Not that I'm trying to build that much, but it's one of those pieces that I sometimes forget about. It's like, oh, well, if you're supposed to be doing some outreach, then maybe you need to be thinking about how you put that in those grants to build a little bit more capacity around that.
Yeah. So you focus on some of those things that you normally think of operations, but make it into more of
a task of that related to that particular project.
Yeah. That could support the mission of the granting organization. Yeah. In some
right.
way. So don't just look for local food
mm-hmm.
things. Just I see what you're saying. Yeah. Creativity is can really it can help. It can.
And what can you say about what's appropriate in terms of enough? You said don't pad the budget, but I've also heard some folks say give yourself enough support that you've got some capacity to write the next grant within that grant. Is that realistic?
Well, I think that's pretty tough. I mean, you don't want to cut yourself short, because if you're going to have a successful project, and I didn't go into a lot about the difference between a project and a program. A project it has a life. I mean, a project has a beginning and a middle and an end, and you did the project and you put it, you kind of put it aside. Whereas a program is an ongoing sort of, you got to fund it, keep it funded all the time. And I think programs are a lot harder to fund than projects are. A lot of programs live on project money, but you just have to keep the project. That's what you're talking. I think like PFI, for a long time, I think they try to do that. I don't know. I myself, I've always felt like it's good to have like a 3-pronged strategy. If you're trying to accomplish something, like a third of your money comes from grant money, a third of your money comes from some other stable source, whatever that be, where that is and what that stable source is. And then another third of your money is, in the foundation world, that third would be like your income from your investments, which unfortunately we don't have. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the a struggling nonprofit doesn't have an endowment a lot of times, but you certainly don't want to get caught up in being completely dependent on grant money for your existence. you've got to find out, you got to find either some kind of service or something you can provide, or some income stream that you can, that you can use for that match money, that you can, that you can use.
Are you going to talk at all about endowments, or Lynn, maybe is that something we want to kind of think about in terms of this fundraising talk later on this year?
I certainly want to talk about it at the Reefus League meeting in September. But Mary, if you have any just general thoughts, I mean, we would love to look at that as the local foods program team, but there's a lot.
It's a lot.
You think there's hoop jumping with grants, you ought to see what there is for endowments. Yeah. So, yeah.
No, I agree. I agree, Lynn. And fundraising and endowments is another whole world that beyond grant writing, I would say. You do, like I said, you get pulled into that a little bit, because sometimes some of your granting agencies, push you toward that. I've had a granting agency who said, well, until you start an endowment, we're not giving you any more money until you start creating wealth for your organization, which was kind of a shock, but it worked. And now there is a little bit of an endowment for that organization. But that's another whole, it is another whole level of, that I'm not prepared. I'm not prepared really, to talk about, but I do think it's I think it's a good direction for long-term sustainability.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. Jan's been in this as long as I have, haven't you, Jan? Longer, maybe even, I would say.
We are at an hour, and often that's about where we end up, but I booked us for an hour and a half, so I don't want anyone to feel rushed. I also don't want anyone to feel pressured. Mary, can you, in the chat area, can everybody see the chat when it's up and it says everyone?
I had
down below, when you've got a screen, it says chat, and if you click on that, you can write. Mary, if you can put your contact information, whatever you're comfortable with, if it's an email, if it's a phone number, and then I will also, when Mary shares her information with me, I will make sure that, Mary, make sure you put your contact information, whatever you want, on your documents. And again, I don't want to rush us. I just want to make sure everybody knows Mary is going to provide a lot of this information for you. I will talk to Lee, and she will put the recording on our website, the Local Food Program Team website, under resources for local food coordinators. And then she'll also put any documents that Mary provides, and then that'll have her contact information. So that will be there for you to look into. But again, I just want you to know that we'll have that. You'll be able to go back and listen to this again if you'd like. You'll be able to look at some of the ideas that Mary had. But we still have about 20 minutes if anybody has any additional questions or comments or thoughts that you'd like to put out.
This is Jan again from the phone. So I'm interested in hearing from the other folks on this call, as well as Mary or Lynn. I think on sort of two questions. One is just your sense of the changing environment of food system support, given what's going on in the state of Iowa legislatively, what's going on at the federal level legislatively. That's one question, and I'll let folks pick that around before I might, and see if there are other questions before I pose another one.
Well, I know from our perspective, sadly, although, the governor has not signed the legislation that closes and defunds, or defunds and closes the Leopold Center. So until he does that, that's a done deal. And he can line item veto certain portions. There are petitions. You can still call the office if this is, and I'm not advocating for this because I'm on Iowa State time and this is being recorded. So I'm not, very clearly not advocating. I'm just saying this has not been completed, but it is still a possibility. As an opportunity, if you have opinions, you may still share them at this point. that the Marketing Food System Initiative provided, Jan, as you know, I mean, and Courtney and I, my colleague, we just lost a grant that would have allowed us to work on an online certification program for local food coordinators. Now, as I said earlier, you know, Courtney and I both believe this is very important work, and we think it could help a lot of us do our work better, and a lot of folks on the phone and in the Reefus Week local food leader cohort. We're going to try and find another way to do this. Some of the content development we can do as a paid employee of the local foods program team. Some of the technology we'll have to get creative and find funding for that. So it is, we are starting to see it. Iowa State has, the legislature has, the budget has us about 4 to 5% less than last year. So, and again, until that's signed and then Iowa State processes it at the accounting level, and it comes to each of the department heads, we won't know how that impacts all the different departments. We are under Extensions, Ag and Natural Resources. It will probably be a minimum of a 4 to 5% decrease in funding. And that's all we're anticipating, but we don't have any confirmation. Again, it could be more or less. So that would be wonderful. So those are the two areas. And then, as I mentioned earlier, because we are the state partner for Food Corps, we were made aware of the fact that, you know, what we learned when we heard about the federal legislation that if AmeriCorps funding is defunded, that is about 20% of the Food Corps total budget. And like Mary said, they try to diversify their funding, but 20% is 1/5 of their budget. So that will impact next year's cohort, and will mean that instead of I believe it's if there's not, instead of 218 service members, it may drop down to under 200, and they may not be able to add sites or things like that. So sadly, there is some impact. At our meeting on May 25th, we're having a regional food system working group meeting on May 25th at Cherry Glen Learning Farm near Polk City. We will have Anna Johnson from Center for Rural Affairs and Carrie Chenault and Caitlin Szymanski. They will be talking about federal legislation and how it could impact us as talk of the 2018 Farm Bill continues. We hope to have some local elected officials and some food policy folks that can help us learn a little bit more about how they see food system work on the horizon. And then Chelsea Lepley at that on the final session will be talking about citizen lobbying. So, and that can be for anything, for an idea, for funding. She's just going to help folks learn again, and it will be when you are a citizen. If you work for a nonprofit or an academic institution, we cannot do that with our professional hats on, as it should be. So yes, Jan, there have been some impacts financially. I don't know, you know, they say some of the funding that was coming to the Leopold Center would be diverted to the nutrient management system. I believe there's a different, probably mission and vision. I know there is a different mission and vision. So there would be some different probably goals and strategies, and funds would be deployed in a different fashion than the Leopold Center did. And I don't have enough knowledge about that organization to know what that looks like. So that's just a handful of things that I'm aware of at this point. Others?
How about others? Yeah, how about others on the call?
I'd be curious to know who else has grants on the call that are being affected by the Leopold Center that won't be funded, because the grant I mentioned earlier for the processing was an MFSI grant that is probably not going to have any funding now attributed to it.
Well, this is Jan. We have one year grant that we might be able to wrap up within the remaining funding. We have another one that is a 2-year grant that will be pretty significantly impacted.
Yes, this is Jody, and I have 2 grants from the Leopold Center. I'm in year 2 of one and year 1 in another one.
And I would
Well,
assume,
it's
Jody,
just-
is it the same for you, where there's a likelihood that you'll be able to finish up your first one? And I know it's the doors close July 1st, and I think that's when the funding is shut off. So is that true that you'll be able to continue to function with your current grant through June 30th, and then the other one maybe not?
Yes, yeah, still trying to work all that out. Hopefully.
Work fast.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Thanks.
I just, this is Jan again. We had an opportunity to visit with Bill Northey last year, and one of the points that I think folks like all of us connected through the regional food system working group and so forth, I don't know exactly how we be a little bit more organized about having a presence. Mary, you made the comment about keeping your project's profile so that you continue to get engagement with potential funders. And the commodity ag groups are regularly in and out of Northeast attention and office, and I don't feel that the sustainable ag or the local food presence is nearly as regular. And I don't think we probably have the capacity to be quite as regular, but I think we could be more strategic in terms of advocating for funding and attention of that particular department. Not that they have a lot of money to give us, I realize, but I just think he would be supportive of local food stuff and in other places as well. How we work together to keep that profile up and continue to demonstrate the importance of those kinds of funding sources.
Jan, this is Lynn, and I think you're so right. I think 2 things came to mind. Teresa, and I don't know, Kayla, I know Arlene is kind of leading the charge. They are working on a new branding campaign since the Buy Fresh, Buy Local. It was kind of determined that that wasn't as effective a branding campaign or resource here. And so they are working on a new branding opportunity for local products. That could be a really marvelous jumping off point, or at least possibility for a way to start creating that system that shows how many folks are involved and a part of a local food system. And I don't even want to call it statewide, because some of our neighbors, like Kayla, she has a tri-state audience. Our folks in Northwest Iowa have a tri 2 or 3 state or 4 states sometimes. On all of our corners, we've got different state partners. So that branding campaign is could be an opportunity. And then Chuck Eisenhart just mentioned too that the Regional Food System Working Group right now, because it is still has very limited support, but the home base is Iowa State. Rufus Wig has limitations on political and engagement and advocacy and things like that. However, I think, sorry, I have to plug my computer and I'll keep talking, but I think it's getting closer and closer. Oh, sorry, you guys. Shoot. I think it's getting closer and closer to moving to a self-sustaining organization where there will need to be a really good conversation about what kind of group might you want to become if you can sustain yourself outside of extension. So that's a conversation that I think in the next year or 2 needs to rise to the top. It might not happen in the next year, but I think there needs to be a plan for that, because that could be an organization that could be a force for change too.
Thank you.
One of the things I keep thinking about too is that public health is really, I mean, we're just getting more and more and more messages about, what we eat, how we eat, you know, how poor the public health is in the United States. And it seems to me that some of that, but certainly, and I know they have funded some things and will continue, but it seems like that could be another area too of, you know, to look at and to really look for funding and to, you know, if the ag funding isn't going to be there, that possibly that, you know, it would come from another department, you know, come from other areas as well.
Are there folks on the call that have some good examples of that? I know there's been a little bit of work done with some public health support, but I'm interested in those folks who have been successful in sort of stepping beyond the usual suspects of support.
Jan, this is Lynn again. I actually know of two instances. Cass County, their public health, they're working with Courtney, but rather than hire a local food coordinator, they're going to hire a person called a local health coordinator, in part because their public health department is one of the major contributors. And then on the local foods program team, as you know, or maybe you don't, but we are partnering with Susie Wilson with Iowa Department of Public Health, and she's working with 6 of the local food coordinators, including Jody, who's on the line, and Jen, 2 of the folks who are on the line, to work on school gardens and local procurement in schools. So this is our 2nd year of that grant, and Susie and I are going to be meeting to see if we can continue this partnership. The money went up this year, and hopefully it will go up more after that.
This is Sherry McGill. Can you hear me? I'm with Kelly. Kelly and I are sitting here together. So, you know, the other part would be, and we're a part of, we get some funds through the health department as well through that method with school gardens and our, you know, in program. But the other part I would say is the county, in our area, it's the counties, the extension councils and the variety of counties that do support with a 2-year MOU usually each time. And so you just never know if you're going to be able to continue to get that money or not, but you just keep trying on that. I'm just working on the new MOU now that would be for another 2 years. One county has backed out, so we'll have to see where else we can find that funding. So far, the health department funding has offset part of it.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any other questions for Mary? And I don't want to put her on the spot too much because we've only got just a few minutes, but I do want to share that Arlene, again, is kind of our resident expert on evaluation. So remember that, again, not to get into it right now, but if you have any other questions, you know, she said they typically ask for 5 to 10% of the budget. That's a pretty big swing. So if you have questions about, well, when would I ask for 5%? When would I ask for 10%? Or what kind of work would take a lot of evaluation? I don't know if there's a difference between qualitative and quantitative. Well, I know there's a difference, and I know one seems clearly to be a little easier, you know, with qualitative, but quantitative can be very powerful. Stories are ever so important. And I know Arlene and Alice and Corey, who we've worked with, are pretty magical, I think, when it comes to being able to make data and stories turn into really valuable information that can be shared with folks, you know, that when we're submitting grants. So not to give you more work, Arlene, but she's a wonderful resource if you have basic questions about evaluation and what part of a grant it might play or what part of a grant it should play. She could be another great resource. So anything else for the good of the cause before we wrap up? Sarah Keeley, did you have something? Sorry. No? Okay, I thought I might have seen that flip on there. And again, this is recorded, so you'll be able to go back and look. Mary will send me the information, and then Lee is pretty good about this. So I would think it will be on our website, if not by tomorrow, certainly by next week. So you'll have access and feel free to share it widely. You will get an evaluation. It's through Qualtrics. I think it only takes about 5 minutes. Would really, really, really appreciate you filling it out. And then don't hesitate to suggest topics and suggest yourself as a presenter or someone you know. And we learned through a survey that you like to have these calls every other month. So I think we will shoot probably for a late June or early July, because we've got our REFA-SWIG quarterly meeting on policy education May 25th. Then we've got a field day. Our REFA-SWIG field day is June 21st in Southwest Iowa. So exciting, yay, we're going west this time. And we'll be visiting some folks over in Cass County, Audubon area over there. And more details will be coming, but those are 2 dates that you can put on your calendar. So, okay, Mary, thank you so much. This was really valuable, a lot of great information. I know when folks can look at some of the ideas that you submitted and sit and, you know, peruse that, and you may hear from folks. I appreciate your willingness to be a resource, and very grateful for the time you took today.
Okay.
And thanks everybody else. Have a great day.
Yeah.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.